think it's super important um, for our CUSM community, both for the School of Medicine, MBS, as well as our clinical partners that will have exposure to this type of material. So today's session will be on, as part of our #2 workshop in our workshop series, Institutional Review Board, the IRB application and its processing. What are elements that are important to complete that process? And what are our responsibilities, either as student researchers, co-investigators, principal investigators, and research associates involved with different projects. So as we go forward, obviously, here are some of our learning objectives and our session objectives today. We'll define the purpose of the Institutional Review Board. Why is it there? And what is its main function? We'll look at the composition of the IRB and its significance and why is it composed in that way. We'll also look at levels of the CUSM IRB reviews. There are definite elements and levels of the CUSM IRB reviews. And don't be fooled, just because you only hear of exempt or expedited reviews, that doesn't mean that there are not full reviews. There are actually 3 levels of review, but we'll most likely be exposed to the first 2. We'll also look at the IRB application. What does it look like? And what are some items that you should forecast, that you should just expect that you need to complete these? All of our IRB applications will contain these forms and these procedures. And we'll look at the components of the IRB process in terms of medical education. I'll show you some examples at the latter part of the session today, and then we'll open it up to question and answer. Please go ahead and enter those questions onto the chat, and then I'll make sure that I'll read them off the chat so our audience here in person can also hear some of those questions. Institutional Review Board. I'm going to go a little bit more efficiently on this because it's not necessarily a lecture, but hopefully some of this will sound familiar to many of you. But if it sounds new to some of you and you have questions, please, let's go ahead and get that conversation going. So what is an Institutional Review Board? Well, its function is really in this first bullet. It's to provide core protection in biomedical and behavioral research. It is to protect subjects. It is to protect specimens. It is to protect in our business of education and the business of research, it is really to protect human subjects. So it's in the umbrella of protection and the protection of human subjects. And why is this important to us? It's important to us is because we want to make sure we don't create a history of harm, in the sense that we take advantage of individuals or human beings or patients or participants in studies, take advantage of what they do not know about their rights to voluntarily agree or disagree to participate in any activity. We need to make sure that we give ample opportunity if we are asking for participants to take part in some type of activity, that we give them an opportunity to say, yes, I will participate, or no, I do not wish to participate. And in these sub-bullets here, it's to provide independent evaluation of research to ensure ethically acceptable practices, checking investigator potential biases, evaluating compliance with federal regulations. And IRB is required for US studies funded, where funding is by the Department of Health and Human Services and other US federal agencies. Typically, if there's any monies involved, especially from municipalities or the federal government, IRB approval and oversight is often required. And where do these requirements come from? What is the actual document? Well, you'll see this abbreviation in a lot of different documents related to IRB. It's called the Code of Federal Regulations. And I put the website here as well as the web link so that you can look this up at a later time. It is rather extensive. I didn't put the whole scan up here, but you'll see that the CFR codes, this Code of Federal Regulations, lists essentially every code and every scenario and circumstance in which there are regulations that you need to follow in terms of protection. I'm going to switch really quick here so you can see some of those elements. Can you all see this in virtual land? Dr. Townsend, can you see this document? Perfect. Thank you so much. You'll see that here is CFR code 21, part 56. Now there's other parts, but I'm just showing you this one because it relates to food and drug administration. This is pertinent to much of our research in the health sciences, medical education, and clinical sciences because a lot of medications are being tested in many different experiments and asking participants to take part in those different experiments and studies. But you'll see these CFRs cover a wide variety of different types of elements related to research, different types of data, different types of specimens, different types of participation in activities related to research activities. And you can see that it's quite extensive, that there's a number of these different CFR regulations and codes specifically for items dealing with food and drug elements. So I'm just showing you this as an example that there are a ton of regulations, and this is only Title 21 for food and drugs, specifically pertaining to a lot of the work that many of you may be involved in, specifically with medications, participating in randomized controlled trials, et cetera. So there are these regulatory requirements that we must fulfill in terms of participating and executing different types of research activities. And who oversees this? Well, there's this entity called the Institutional Review Board, which is a human protections committee that is responsible for reviewing procedures, reviewing protocols. And under those federal regulations, those CFRs, there must at least be 5 members of varying backgrounds, both sexes, and more than one profession is being represented. This looks like it's a very general and loose criteria, but it's there for a specific reason. So it eliminates bias in terms of having only one type of profession or one type of perspective. So what you'll see here, this allows for a small, very modular committee that can operate on many different perspectives in order to consider and review these applications and these protocols for research. At least one scientific member must be present, one non-scientific member, and one unaffiliated member. Members should be sufficiently qualified, and that's by degree or by training and experience, through diverse experience or expertise to safeguard subjects' rights and welfare and to evaluate research acceptability related to the laws, regulations, institutional commitments, and professional standards. So members must be sufficiently qualified by training or experience in the various areas. In academia, in institutions where research is conducted in terms of human research, and as well as lab science, bench science, basic science research, scientific member, one non-scientific member, and an unaffiliated member are often ensured so that it eliminates bias and singular perspectives. At least one member is knowledgeable about any regularly researched vulnerable group, and members must report and recuse themselves in terms of conflicts of interest that they identify, whether that they worked with those individuals before or currently working on a project with those individuals before are very good reasons to excuse themselves from those reviews. Also, the IRB can invite ad hoc experts as needed in case they need alternate perspectives or alternate experience in order to review those specific applications where another perspective is required. You'll note here on the bottom, CUSM, on our IRB, we have 6 members plus 2 ex officio members and 1 administrative personnel on IRB. There are also 2 co-chairs that serve on the IRB. So there are 2 co-chairs, 6 members, and 2 ex officio members and 1 administrative personnel. So our IRB, even though we are considered a small university, we have a very solidified IRB committee. The question is from the audience, are the 2 co-chairs part of the 6 members? They're in addition to the 6 members. So it's 2 plus 6 plus 2 plus 1. So it's a very, not a large committee, but it's a very intact, structured committee. Very good question. Thank you. All right, let's keep going. The IRB functions and their operations, they follow written procedures. They follow written procedures. What you'll find is that on the CUSM research webpage, and I'll give you some scans in the forthcoming slides, is that there are elements for written procedures that can be downloaded from that webpage. So they have to follow written procedures for the initial and continuing review of any changes and amendments. So by following written procedures, that means that for these applications, it must be a written application that's submitted to the IRB. And when they say written, it is in a document. Typically, you can put in an electronic document as a PDF file that can be submitted to our IRB. The written procedures for reporting unanticipated problems, risks, and noncompliance, all of those communications must also be written and submitted to the IRB. For example, if one of your participants in your research experiment or research study falls ill during the process of the experiment, you must notify the IRB. And it has to be done in writing so that there is documentation and it can be filed and then reviewed by the IRB committee. Quorum, in terms of any decisions made by the IRB, quorum of the majority at convened meetings must be maintained, and the approval or decisions are made by majority vote. Not unanimous vote, but by majority vote. You'll see here for reviewing proposals, the IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications of, or disapprove research. So they have the authority to approve, require modifications, any changes that they see necessary in order to secure the protection and cause no harm to participants. They can make those requests for modifications as well as disapprove of research from continuing. As part of the review process, if there are human subjects involved, you are required to have informed consent and documentation that consent and informed consent was given. Or, and I put in parentheses, or approve of a waiver. There are instances where you can have a waiver of consent under special circumstances. In terms of reviewing proposals, notify investigators in writing of any of those decisions, whether their research is approved, any modifications or changes are approved or disapproved, or the research itself is being disapproved to be continued. All of that must be done in writing. You will receive a letter. At least one annual continuing review must be done. That's why in our CUSM IRB processes, we are granted approval for 1 year. In larger institutions, because they're larger, sometimes their approvals last not just 1 year, but maybe 2 years. Because it's a larger institution, they don't have the capacity to keep reviewing protocols every single year, as an example. But our institution, we're compact enough that we can review proposals on a yearly basis. Any questions so far? I'm going through this material pretty efficiently, so if there's any questions or comments, please let me know. I wrote this slide and provided just the general criteria for approval of research proposals. The IRB should determine that risks are minimized. The common rule, which I've given you, I'll give you 2 slides on the common rule, is to make sure that there's no potential to exceed minimal risk. We're considering research to move forward and to be approved if there is minimal risk or less posed to human subjects. So the IRB should determine that risks are minimized, risks are reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits, if any, and the importance of the expected knowledge. So subject selection is equitable. That's where randomization comes in, and attention to vulnerable populations is considered. Informed consent will be sought and documented. Adequate provisions for monitoring. There are adequate provisions to protect confidentiality and additional safeguards for subjects vulnerable to coercion or undue influence. So authority and records. For the IRB, they have authority. Institutional officials cannot approve research that is disproved by the IRB. So if the IRB says no, it doesn't matter if there's administrators on your campus or your organization, they cannot overturn that. They cannot proceed with any activities because the IRB disapproved it. I will say this also, if you do not have IRB approval, you cannot initiate or continue research activities. So even if you're in the application process, you don't have that letter in hand, your principal investigator does not have that letter in hand, you cannot proceed with any activities. If the IRB has approved of a particular date as a start date, you have approval, but it's a week, let's say it's a week before that date has arrived, you can't start research activities until that date arrives, even if you have an approval. Does that make sense? It becomes critical, especially there are timelines involved, funding involved, a lot of external pressures, institutional pressures, the overwhelming urge to begin research activities often may lead to poor decision making and collecting data when you're not yet allowed to collect data. So I have to impress that once approval is granted and you have letter in hand and start date is identified, you can't start until you have the approval and the start date arrives. In terms of records of research proposals, meetings, actions, correspondence, any correspondence, names of members and so forth, they are all recorded with the IRB. And I'll give you an example of what those elements are in the latter slides. Any questions so far? All right, now we're getting into the review elements. We've gotten through the structural elements. Now we're going through the review elements. There are 3 levels of IRB review: exempt, expedited, and full. And I picked these pictures on purpose. Just because a review is exempt does not mean you don't have to go through an IRB review. What this means is that you're exempt from certain types of review. For example, the first picture here on the top right, a lot of data, numbers, data that's already been collected. You're not necessarily working with human subjects. You're working from data sets of data that was received from human subjects. You might not know who they are, might be de-identified, but it's data nonetheless that's connected to a human subject. That connection or that link may no longer exist, or it is existing, it's just hidden, it's kept confidential. But because you're not working directly with patients, it's not primary data, it's secondary data, it might go under an exempt review because you're not working with a live subject or a live participant, but you are working with data that can be somehow linked to a human being. To minimize their risk, you need to de-identify and make it confidential and secure that confidentiality. That might undergo an exempt review. Expedited doesn't necessarily mean fast. What it means is there's another level of examination for human protections. Maybe you're collecting data directly from a patient, like a survey, and you're interacting with a patient. And you promise them that you will not record their name and connect that name to their responses. You promise confidentiality. It's another level of review because now it's not secondary data. It's not data that was collected in the past. It's collected directly from a live patient. And now you're promising that you'll protect their identity and keep their information confidential. Now it goes under an expedited review, another layer of scrutiny, because now a human is actively involved in providing responses. Role review is you can't guarantee minimal risk, minimizing risk, minimal risk. You can't guarantee that you're going to minimize risk because now there's something more invasive. So the second picture here for expedited is actually talking to someone and interacting with someone. And this third picture here is a more invasive procedure. Maybe you're getting MRI scans from patients under a certain service. And it's involving a very serious procedure in which they're being subjected to an MRI scan. You promise confidentiality, but now you're exposing them to an MRI machine for a certain scan of a certain body part. That might require full review because now more than minimal risk is involved. It's another level of complexity that you need to prepare for in order to protect that patient. Now, Exempt, expedited, and full review. I'm taking some time to go over this simply because all of these reviews take time. Like I said earlier, for expedited review, doesn't necessarily mean it's fast. Typically for CUSM's IRB, an exempt review can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. An expedited review can take anywhere from 2 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, depending on the complexity of the protocol. Full review can take anywhere from at least 4 weeks or a bit longer, depending on the complexity of the experiment. Build that into your application planning. If you know that your research should start by a certain time, these reviews will anticipate at least no less than 2 to 4 weeks for the review to occur. And bear in mind, in our CUSM IRB application process, there is no monthly deadline to receive applications. You can submit an application any day of the month. Any day of the month. So what does that mean? Our poor IRB committee members. Remember, there's 2 co-chairs, there's 6 members, 2 ex officios, and 1 administrative personnel. On any given day, they can get any number of applications. So just please plan ahead. It's not that we don't want to overburden the IRB. They accepted the challenge. They know what's in store. But we want to make sure we plan ahead so we give them ample time to get to the reviews they need to get to. I'm spending some time on that slide simply because I think these are important concepts to cover. Any questions so far? All right, perfect. I have promised some slides on talking about the common rule in terms of exempt status. This is just a review of the previous slide for exempt, expedited, and full review. Really, there are 8 federal categories of research activities involving human subjects that may be exempt. I list them here. In terms of these criteria, studies eligible for exempt review are those that do not present more than minimal risk. That's the key word for the common rule. The key words here are do not present more than minimal risk. And typically for exempt protocols, that's where things like confidentiality, you're securing confidentiality either by de-identifying data or locking a linking sheet between identity of the person and their responses in a locked file cabinet in only in which the principal investigator has the key. Do you see the elements of protection here? An encrypted flash drive will be the only flash drive that will store data, and only the principal investigator has that encrypted flash drive. Many different layers of security here to secure confidentiality, presenting no more than minimal risk. Meets criteria for one of the 6 categories under the federal regulations. I won't go over those in detail because we can look those up. Informed consent can be verbal in this case, but participants should be provided with the study information through an information sheet or a written script. They have to be given a document outlining what they're agreeing to or not agreeing to. And the IRB strongly recommends that the consent process be documented, meaning it's in paper and you give a copy to your participants. I'll go over this one for expedited status, and I'm only going to go over exempt and expedited for the sake of our student members and our junior investigators, because most of the research that we've seen thus far are fitting under the mold of exempt and expedited status. We're not getting into, especially in our student population, into randomized control trials. But under expedited status, 9 federal categories of research activities involving human subjects that can be approved under the expedited review. The common rule here is presenting no more than minimal risk and involving only procedures listed in one or more of the expedited categories. So that's the other layer here for expedited review for common rule. No more than minimal risk and involves only procedures listed in one or more of the expedited categories on the CFRs. When you go on our website, this is where you're going to find all of your materials. This is where you're going to find the application materials. It's available publicly for our community, our CUSM community, as well as our clinical partners. I put some arrows here. You're going to go to our CUSM homepage. And under the homepage, there's a box here that says research. I want you to click that. Once you click that box, it'll take you to this page. Look at this beautiful picture. On this page, it'll say Institutional Review Board. You're going to click that. Once you click that, now you're here. at the IRB home. On the IRB home, you'll see new application, and here's where all the documents are, readily accessible for you. You have 3 documents as part of the application. There's a 4th document that will become part of the application. The 3 application forms are the IRB application form, the project roster that lists all of your personnel, and the 3rd form is called determination of activity form. And it sounds very intimidating, but it's really just declaring what the activities in your research project are. You have to describe it in detail. Those are the 3 forms that formulate the application. The 4th is this one called a sample consent form. I'm going to show you what that is on a forthcoming slide. But the sample consent form is the consent form that you're going to submit to patients or participants. And it's a really nice template because it gives you the language and then blanks to fill in. So it gives you a very good starting point to fill out a very nice and complete consent form. But there are 3 application forms here: roster, the application, and the determination of activity form, as well as the consent form. There's also education and training and how to get what's called city trained or city online training. For our students in the audience and our new investigators, junior investigators, if you're participating in any research activities, you must be IRB trained. Because you're affiliated with CUSM, we provide you this link. It's on the very bottom here. If you could see it, it says education and training. It says training instructions right here. It will take you directly to the city training site. And you click on the city training site that says medical and behavioral training. And they'll run you through the training. That training is good for 2 years. And it's free for you because you're affiliated with CUSM. So for our virtual participants, new investigators, junior investigators, or you're about to submit for or create a IRB application, if you're participating in any research activities, you must be city trained, IRB trained. To get that certificate, follow that link, do the certification. It only takes maybe 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your efficiency. 2 hours. Dr. Sandu says 2 hours. Perfectly. As long as you get that certificate, that's at least good for 2 years. Okay. But you'll see the reason why I'm spending some time on this slide is because all the information that you need for the formal application process is on this webpage. Dr. Itar. The question is, does the IRB board need to be city trained? That's a good question. I say yes, absolutely. They are all seasoned researchers on that board. Very good question. Any questions from the virtual audience? We're doing okay? All right, let's keep moving. We're doing well. Here's our personnel. Now, some of these individuals are not on the IRB committee. They are individuals that are associated with our research activities here on campus. Many of you know Dr. Hania Tanma, who's our Associate Dean for Basic Research. He oversees the research activities, especially in basic science at CUSM. He's also a professor and teaches in our pre-clerkship curriculum. Wafa Tanma is our Operations Director and Office of Research Coordinator. Works very closely with Juliana Kim, who is our Research and IRB Administrative Coordinator. If you have questions about procedure, forms, or specific questions about your own protocol, about your own application, please contact Wafa and Juliana. They've got a lot of experience and a lot of information that they can share with you regarding your preparation of your IRB application. Our two co-chairs for our IRB are Dr. Carol Lee from ARMC. She is our CUSM IRB co-chair, along with Dr. Samuel Schwartz, who is our assistant dean for clerkship at CUSM IRB co-chair. He's a faculty here as well as a clinician across the street at ARMC. Dr. Carol Lee is, I believe, the director of the emergency medicine residency program. Has many years of experience clinically, but also faculty here at CUSM. These are our co-chairs. And I just made a note here again. The co-chairs are in addition to the 6 members of the IRB and the 2 ex officio members and the administrative personnel. All right, here's some scans of what I would like you to consider in terms of preparations for your IRB application. This is the determination of activity, the DOA form. What to consider? Principal investigator. I put this in red. I'm going to make this a blanket statement. It's not something to scare our students or to intimidate students. Students cannot be principal investigators on projects. The principal investigator must be a faculty member or a clinician affiliated with CUSM, either having a full-time title, assistant professor, associate professor, professor, or clinical title, or an adjunct title, but they must be affiliated with CUSM to be a principal investigator. So what that means is students can help and assist and prepare the IRB application materials, which I believe is excellent practice for students. You should be able to participate in writing up this application. I fully support that. The reason why is the more practice you have on it now, it will be that much more beneficial when you get into residency because you'll have to do it anyway. Okay? So for principal investigators, must be a CUSM faculty or CUSM affiliated personnel. Students cannot serve as a PI, unfortunately, but they can serve as research associates and research assistants on those protocols. All fields that are pertinent to your project must be completed. On the applications, you have to read every section carefully. You don't have to complete every section if it does not apply to your project. If you forget that it applies to your project, you'll most likely get a written document from the IRB saying, hey, do you need to clarify this because we believe that you forgot to fill this out. That's where the communication happens. It'll happen by writing. Okay. The determination of activity forms is only 4 pages long. It only gets long because you're going to be cutting and pasting a lot of information in there, and I'll show you what I mean. You can submit these forms once you complete them at any time. There's no monthly deadline. You can submit them at any time of the month. The time for review for your application forms is around 2 to 4 weeks. What I fully recommend for those writing up their applications is to not separate their forms. Once you get all your forms completed, put it in one single PDF document. And I'm going to show you an example. All right, next form, project roster. What to include in it. Include everybody. Include everybody. Include all student personnel. So if there's students that are participating in research, all of them must be city certified. All of them must have a certificate. Okay? Include all external personnel, meaning that people that are consultants, people that are providing supplies that are going to help train your research assistants. Put all your external personnel in there. If they're participating in research activities, they too must be IRB certified, city certified. If they're only supplying materials, they don't have to be IRB certified. Include all city training certificates. So if you have your certificate, give that to your PI. They're going to compile them and include them in this application. Why? The IRB wants to know who is city certified. You'll notice here, you'll include first name, last name, and the role that the individual is playing, their email address, and did they get any training? Check off the box. If the IRB notes that one person does not have training, but they think that this person should have training, they'll communicate with the PI to say this person needs training. They cannot participate, even if they're a vendor. If they find that this person is essential for the activities of research, they may ask that person to be city trained. Include all email addresses and sign at the bottom by the principal investigator. The IRB application. This is just the cover page. And again, this is 8 pages long. It sounds like it's long, but it's not very long. You're going to be doing a lot of cutting and pasting from your proposal document that you're going to prepare. Again, principal investigator has to be a CUSM affiliated person, faculty member, full-time clinician, part-time clinician, adjunct. They must be CUSM affiliated. Complete all pertinent fields in the application. It's only 8 pages long. Again, 2 to 4 weeks, but in certain applications, it may take longer than 4 weeks. Just bear that in mind. So plan ahead. Attach all consent forms, pamphlets, brochures, surveys, translated copies if it's in another language, because many of you will be working on research with participants and patients who speak a language other than English. Any translated copies, include those as well. I'll show you an example at the latter part of the session. Create a single PDF document with the determination of activity form, with the roster and the application and any necessary documents. Put it all under one PDF. That way you know it's all in one place. That fourth document that I mentioned, the consent form, here's the template. This is an exact scan of the entire template. Anything in red is the fill in the blank. So study title, you'll enter it here. Principal investigator, you'll enter the name here. Student researchers, you'll enter those names here, etc., etc. Now, this doesn't mean this is all you need to type in. For very specific elements, like the risks, like the benefits, the procedures, compensation, you're going to have to enter that if it's something very unique about your experiment, about your study. So be prepared to describe that into your consent form. Okay. I list those elements here. You get the idea. But this is a nice template to let you know these are the sections you need to start writing about. Okay. Once you get a consent form, include that in your application. And when you're using the consent form, once the research project is approved by IRB, give a copy of the consent form to any participant that's signing it. And keep a signed copy that says that they do agree to participate in your research project for yourself. You have to keep all of those consent forms with you. Any questions so far? Hopefully it's a little straightforward. It is a process. It seems intimidating, but it's really not. The IRB is there to help you move forward with your research, protecting human subjects along the way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some examples of the IRB. This is our current IRB application, the full application. And you'll note here I'm a co-principal investigator. The original principal investigator is Dr. Orozco. This was way back in 2022. This is an ongoing research project. And here's our title. This is the first page of our IRB application. What you'll note here, everything here are entered on fields. What I recommend for students to do and junior investigators, as well as seasoned investigators, is before you even fill out your IRB application, you're going to write a proposal. And it's going to have all of these elements, but you're going to write a proposal. It's basically a long research paper. It's going to be around 5, maybe 8 pages long. It's going to have all of these elements. You're going to describe your research activities. When you write your proposal, that has your background information, your hypotheses, your methods, data collection, how you're going to ensure consent, human protections, your methods for data collection, data analysis. All of that you're going to write up on a separate Word document. Once you're done with that, now it's just cutting and pasting that and putting it into the application. You're not going to start writing this in the application. Write your document first. Write your proposal first. Once you get that completed, you get the sign off from your principal investigator. Now you can start cutting and pasting those elements into the application. So what you'll see here are these fields. Number 1, title. Number 2, PI. Number 3, personnel. You'll check a box if there's funding involved. Enter that description from your proposal about the funding that you've received. Number 5, conflict of interest. Are there any? No, there are none. Number 6, additional reviews. Has this been reviewed by any other entity? If you mark yes, describe it. That's from your protocol. Here, study summary, abstract suitable for a lay audience. This is cut and paste directly from our proposal. Number 8, purpose of the project. What is our purpose? This is cut directly from our proposal. Do you see how the pattern here? You're going to create your proposal, and once it's signed off by your PI, you should be able to cut and paste it and insert it right into the application. So you're not doing double work. The application is just an application. The work is front-loaded by your proposal. Number 9, participant population and project procedures. Once you are done writing that up in your proposal, cut and paste it here. Section 3, study design, etc. Do you see the pattern? Some fields, they don't apply. You don't have to fill those out. But then again, once you're done populating these fields on this application, your PI needs to sign off on this. So they should have the final review of the entire application to make sure that all fields are appropriately completed. Right? So our principal investigators on the call, as well as in the room, don't blindly just say, oh, my students are excellent. They are, but we all make mistakes. Make sure that before you sign off on your application that all fields are appropriately completed and the correct fields are appropriately completed. And you'll note here, a lot of these elements are cut and paste from your actual research protocol and proposal. This section here, this part B under outcomes and measures, all of this came from our proposal. And as PIs, we make sure that these are correct and accurate, and we sign off on those. You'll note at the end of the application, on the last page, there's a list of appendices. We have a number of appendices. Look what we're submitting. Appendices A, project roster. B, recruitment script. C, recruitment material, flyers, brochures, email draft. D, consent form, etc. I'm putting in everything that's involved, that's paperwork or brochures or materials that I'm using in this research project. We're going to list those out here for appendices. And when all that is complete, our principal investigator signs. And there's a last page here that's signed by the department chair for departmental approval. Next up, project roster. I promised you what the project roster is going to look like. Some of you will recognize these names. You'll note here, every individual has their first, last name identified and their role. You have some research assistants that are students. They're designing, conducting, and reporting on the project. Some are just conducting activities. They're not involved with data collection. They're not involved with data analysis. They're just conducting the activities in terms of recruitment, marketing. And it doesn't necessarily have to fit all on one page. What you'll find is oftentimes you'll need multiple pages because the project is very large or has different components. You can attach pages in case there are multiple personnel. And again, same thing. You'll list their names, what their role is, and an email address. You'll notice some highlights here that are in yellow throughout these pages. Those are highlighted new elements, especially when you're resubmitting an application, because as you know, many research projects can last several years, and you're only changing personnel or adding personnel. Anything that's new, you can highlight so when you resubmit your application for the next year, the IRB committee members can see the new parts very easily by looking for the highlights, making it easier for them, because I know they have a lot of reports that they have to read. As part of the application, not only do we specify the new names and members, but we also specify all the members of our team that are IRB certified. So you'll see here a listing of their city certificates. This is what they look like. Any questions so far for the roster? Yes, Dr. Sandhi. Please.
I'm thinking of a project currently, and I need help from one of the staff with technical expertise to try and archive some videos from the past. So will that person have to be city trained as well?
That's a good question. The question is, if there is a person that we're working with and it's an expert in a certain field and they have technical expertise, if they're not in direct contact with a subject collecting data, they don't have to be city certified because they're not interacting with subjects. For example, if it's the person that is fixing your laptop as part of your organization because your laptop has a glitch in it, but they're part of your institution, they don't have to be city certified.
My second question to you, Elvin, is that I'd like to invite students to join me in that. And so does every student have to be then city certified?
Good question, and I'll rephrase. If I want to invite students to be student research assistants, that will be performing research activities, they must be city certified. At any point, if a student is involved in research activities, whether it's writing of the protocol, doing literature review, collecting data, analyzing data, storing data, assisting with storing data, they need to be city certified. Good questions, excellent questions. Here's the determination of activity form. Let me go ahead and do this. This banner is kind of in the way, so let me down just a little bit. Here's a determination of activity form. There's nothing new on this form. It's going to be cut and paste from your protocol, from your proposal that you write. So what you'll notice here, title of the project, principal investigator, funding, conflict of interest, purpose of the project, project procedures. The reason why that it sounds like it's a lot of repeat information is because really the determination of activity form is a streamlined form. So when an IRB committee member receives it, they already have all of this specific information on one form. They don't have to hunt for it in the full application form. Okay. And it's specifically activities that you're proposing. And again, it's very short. It's only in this case, it's only 5 pages long, but it's really a 4-page application. But because we cut and paste, it ended up getting pushed to 5 pages. Okay. All right. When you go through all those steps, this is what your approval letter will look like. Not just a one-liner. It'll tell you very specifically what you're being approved to do and under what regulations. Now, just to give you a little background as part of this session is that this project, this specific approval letter was for a secondary data analysis of data that we pulled from the internet, publicly available data. It came from California's de-identified public data sets from the Department of Health and Human Services. Public, right? Your tax dollars pay for this in the state. You're allowed to look at this data. It's de-identified, meaning that we have no link between the responses of the respondents to their identities. However, if you look very closely, it's exempt under Category 4. It's under exempt status after they review the protocol under Category 4. What is that category? And many of our student projects fit this category. Under this category, it's secondary research, meaning that it's data that's already been collected for which consent is not required because you're not interacting with a human person. The data is coming from a database. You can't get consent. It's just a publicly available database. Secondary research uses uses of identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens that have been or will be collected for another separate primary or initial activity if at least one of the following criteria is met, et cetera, et cetera. Minimal risk must be protected, right? That's the common rule. So for us to be able to fulfill this regulation, what do we have to promise? We have to promise that the data is de-identified and we have no access to the identities of the respondents. We have to declare that. That's on our protocol. That's how we got exempt approval under this Category 4. We're ensuring that minimal risk will be protected and minimized because we're de-identifying the data and we have no link between the subject, the participant, and their responses. Does that make sense? So for our students that are using publicly available data, you have to go through IRB applications, even if you don't know who provided the answers and responses to your survey that was already collected. Does that make sense? So the misconception is that, well, it's a publicly available data set. Everybody has access to it, and we don't know people's names. But under the common rule, you still have to say, we're still going to protect those people's identity by making sure it's de-identified. That's the ethical pillar of why we're gonna go through IRB approval. Yeah. Any questions? I spent some time on that. I want to nail that nail into the wall because I don't want the misconception out there that, oh, it's a secondary data set. We don't need IRB approval. That's not true. Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of on the subject of secondary data.
Yeah.
Through systematic review.
Very good question. The question is, and I'll rephrase, the question is, what about systematic reviews? meta-analyses. Do we need IRB approval for that? I always say, if you're doing research in which you're collecting data that will eventually go to the public to be presented, get IRB approval. But the technical answer for meta-analyses, systematic reviews, you don't need IRB approval because you're not collecting secondary data. It's data that's been published in a publication already. But I always say, even if it's a systematic review, go through IRB approval anyway. Because there will be a point where you're going to be presenting these data, these findings to the public. Once it becomes presented to the public, it becomes a research. That's the kicker. Anytime that, especially if you work for an academic institution like CUSM, an educational institution, we collect data on everything. And some of it we don't do research on, right? Like we collect data on assessments of assessment data on course performance. We don't publish data on course performance. But the moment a faculty member applies for a research protocol to be approved for IRB because they want to present this new way of analyzing data as a research project and we want to present it to the public, it becomes research. Now it has to go through an IRB approval process. Does that make sense? I wholeheartedly believe if you feel even by 1% out of 100%, you feel by 1%, yeah, we probably should go through IRB, go through IRB. The worst thing that'll happen is that you might get a letter from the IRB that said this does not apply to any of our regulations. The common rule is not violated. You don't have to go through it. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario is we're glad you went through IRB approval process because not many people would have considered this one element, and we're glad you went through approval. Best case scenario. Does that make sense? Fantastic. Any questions from the audience? Virtual land. I get that question a lot. I've published on meta-analyses before. We put them through IRB. Why not have your bases covered? All right. Any other questions? Please. I know this was more of explanatory, but I think that this was worthy. I think that this is not the last time I'll be giving a IRB seminar, especially when it comes to our students getting into their own projects, probably around the beginning of the next semester. That's when ARS 1 ramps up and ARS 2 will be finishing up. I think a lot of students will get into IRB applications. It's a perfect time to do a workshop on this. Bring your IRB applications in, bring those questions in, and then we'll work on those to get them a little bit more fine-tuned. And I recommend to students, and especially junior investigators, and investigators who've been doing this a long time, but they haven't filled out an IRB application in a while because they have assistants and they have research assistants to do that. I say get some practice in there. The more practice you get in there, the better and more efficient you'll be at it. And then you'll be prepared to provide guidance to other team members as projects evolve. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm not seeing any questions on the chat here. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. We'll post these on our Aspire Research Support Unit website. Thank you so much, everyone. We have Dr. Atanma on the call. He has a question.
Thank
Yes,
you,
Dr. Atanma.
Thank you very much. This was comprehensive review for the application by IRB. I just want to make comments, not really a question. Three points. We always give the CT training to the students on our orientation week, so they are able to do and prepare for the CT training, including the IRB. So the students should be all prepared. We advise to do this. Hopefully they do this, and many of them do the training. So they should be ready. This answer to Dr. Sandhu. So they are, if they come to participate in project, should be IRB training. But if they are not, they can come back again and ask for the training, and we allow them to do the training. My second point, back to the exempt status, which is Dr. Hernandez explained it very well. But the most important thing, this information about IRB is publicly available, and you may reach the conclusion that your project is exempt. That is not sufficient enough for you to do the research. Still, the IRB has to decide that. So you have to go through the application and receive the letter that is exempt. So that's very important because many students and also researchers confused with that. If it's exempt and they know it's exempt, why need IRB? No, for the IRB to decide that it's exempt. And the third point, even if you do research, there's a categories of a type of research that is must go through full review, committee meeting review of our IRB, and those are protected groups. If you research, and especially your education research, and you have a lot of surveys there and workshops, if your workshop and research involve children, which is considered a protected group. If it involves pregnant women, prisoners, and there is a list of protected groups, no matter what you do, it's exempt or not, you have to go through full approval by the IRB committee, which means those projects will not be concluded by the chair only. If it's exempt, they have to have the full members of the committee meet together, discuss it, and approve the project for you, or come with the questions or reject it if they see lack or inadequate presentations or protection for the subject's identity and confidentiality and safety. So I just want to make this as clear and pay attention to protected groups also. Dr. Hernandez didn't list it here, but definitely that's something to keep in mind. On September 12th, we have Introduction to Research Day. We were going to have another session on IRB also for the old students there, and faculty were invited too. So they have much more and essentially an explanation and education about the IRB, because it's very important. Many people, students do research without doing IRB, like surveys or collecting assessment data and write a paper, but journals will not publish those papers without IRB approval when it's too late. So you're not going to come back and IRB approve your project. So it's good to be ready from the beginning if you intended to do research and have IRB approval before that. So these are the points I want to add.
Thank you so much, Dr. Atama. And I just wanted to add, different institutions do different things. In our institution, our IRB determines if you're exempt, expedited, full. At Loma Linda, when I was there for 12 years, the investigator had to declare, is this full, is this expedited or exempt? And the IRB verifies. They say, no, 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 you're not exempt, you're actually expedited. So and at Loma Linda, they have 3 different sets of forms. They have forms for exempt, forms for expedited, forms for full. We have one application here. So the reason why I'm telling you this is wherever you go for residency, your hospital might have an IRB. You might be working for an academic medical center. They'll have an IRB. Their processes might be slightly different. So just be prepared for that. Might not look exactly like this. If you end up at Loma Linda, you might have to declare, well, I think this is an exempt application. You might get a letter saying, no, it's not exempt. Filed under expedited. And there they have monthly deadlines at Loma Linda. So if you know it's typically the third, the deadline is the last or the Thursday of the 3rd week of the month. So everyone's rushing on Wednesday, the 3rd week of the month to get their applications in. So it just creates a big roadblock because they just have so many on that 3rd week. So just the point is for that is know the procedures wherever you end up, because that way you can stay ahead of the game and make your plans accordingly. Great, everyone. Thank you so much. Not the last time we're gonna work on these, but if you have any questions, please reach out to myself, Mr. Hoke. We're here for you. Right. And if you have a chance, go ahead and sign in on the sign-in sheet so I can keep track. But other than that, thank you so much. Awesome.